James Lester, CWO4. My high school shop teacher, I had a machine shop in my house in high school, and Mr. Rhodes had been an MR in the Navy, and he knew that I would like to be in the trade. So he told me, he said, "Pat, join the Navy, be an MR, learn a trade, get out, and then you can find a job." Well, we did some of that. We ended up being an MR. They sent us to A school, sent me to A school, and then I was in tender for a while, and then I ended up doing 30 years in the Navy. When I first went to Norfolk in '66, I went to the Vulcan. We joined the Navy, and my daddy took me and my brother down to the Reserve Center in Roanoke, Virginia. We joined, and he had us. I got to take a test, and they told me they would make me an MR, machine repairman. It's a inside machine shop job, and that was in July of '65. We took the test. Then they got the results back, and then August the 5th, 1965, my brother and I both joined the Navy. I was finishing up my high school senior year, and my brother still had a year to go. He was between his junior and his senior year, so we both joined that night. Then I went to boot camp, and it was in Great Lakes. Well, it started out as 12 weeks, but during that time, the rush was on to avoid the draft, so there were so many people joining the Navy, they cut the boot camp down from 12 weeks to 8 weeks. So we were out at boot camp for 8 weeks. And then being a reserve, I went back home, and I went to work in a little machine shop waiting on, I was doing my weekly drill meetings, and then I got orders to go to San Diego to go to A school in April of '66. It's your basic training for your rate. And A school was in San Diego. We learned how to, Navy taught us how to run a lathe, milling machines and grinders, and then that's what A school was all about. Got out of A school, went back home, and then I was waiting on orders to go on active duty. And then I still worked at that little machine shop. And then when I finally got orders, and I left Roanoke November 25th in 1966 and went to the Vulcan. Well, went to Norfolk to the base with two things in mind: to get out of the Navy and get out of Norfolk. And we ended up still living in Norfolk now, and it's 50 years later. And we ended up doing the 30 years in the Navy. But I went to a repair ship, the USS Vulcan. That was the first ship I was on.
USS Vulcan, and why don't you give us a little experience, your experience
on the
Vulcan?
That was during the Vietnam was really starting to heat up then, and we were a repair ship, so all the ships that we were working on was either going to Vietnam or going to the Med, and there was all kinds of work going on, valve work, pump work. In the machine shop, we was always doing a lot of machine work, and just anything that needed to be fixed, we were able to do that. Then, after the 2 years, I got out, and then staying in the reserves. I got out as a second class, and then while in the reserves, I made first class, and then I was able to go to B school through the reserves. So Shirley, my wife, and I got married in '68. So she and I went out to San Diego. I went to a reserve meeting one night, and I had been working on a ship, and talked to a boy that he had just come back from B school, and I was telling him I had a reserve meeting that night, and I was in the reserves. He said, "Well, I had some reserves in my class." I said, "In B school?" He says, "Yeah." I said that they came on active duty to go to B school. So I went to a reserve meeting that night, and I asked the old boy, asked his Chief Youngman, I said, "Chief, can I go to B school?" He says, "Yeah, put a chit in." So I filled a chit in that night, filled it out, gave it to him, and 3 weeks later, my wife Shirley, myself, and our poodle was on a plane headed for San Diego. And we flew out to San Diego and did 17 weeks of B school. And that's the advanced training for MRs. And we learned all turret lathes and tool and cutter grinders, other types of lathes, just turret lathe type work, and very, very technical up in compared to what the A school had been. So it really was very educational, and like I said, I had just picked up first class, and then we came back, and then there was only 2 of us in my class that was from the East Coast. The rest of them, there was 9 of us in the class. The rest of them were from the West Coast. And the one that was from the East Coast, he ended up being the detailer. So he said, Pat, if you ever need anything, just give me a call. So we got out, continued going to our meetings, doing our active duty stuff, and then we decided that maybe it was opportunity to go back into the Navy. And I called him up and I asked him, you know, could you get me a set of orders? He says, yeah, I'll send you to a new submarine tender in Norfolk, the USS Spear. So we went ahead and came back on active duty, and from then on we stayed in. And from the Spear, I went, that was she was 2 years old. She was a new sub tender. We had it was different, because when I was on the Vulcan, I was second class, but when I went to the Spear, like I said, it was a new ship. We had air conditioning, berthing. On the Vulcan, we didn't have anything like that. It was just so much different, and I was first class too, and that made a significant difference. So we got on there, and then we started doing work on fast attack submarines. We was working, all the time. It was just seemed like they were always having things go bad. We needed a fix. It was machine shop was constantly busy, constantly busy. A tender generally stays in port, and the ships come to the tender, and we fix things. And that was the way we were doing. And then we had a squadron of boats, submarines, and we just kept them so that they could go to sea. And between us and the shipyard, sometimes the shipyard would get involved in the really highly technical stuff. But we were doing a lot of work, a lot of even nuclear work, because the subs that we had were all nuclear. They had I got aboard in May of '72, and they had just decommed the last diesel boat. Just before I got there, they decommed the last diesel boat. So everything that we had at that time was all nuclear. And still, we don't have any diesel boats anymore like we used to have. But everything is diesel now. And then we spent 5 years on the Spear, very, very busy, just always, and had some great friends that we made. In fact, we still stay in touch with some of them. You know, machine shop was always busy. We were in 6 sections, so every 6th day you had a duty. Shirley and I was living out in town, and we had I shipped over in '74, so we bought our first house in Norfolk, and then we were living there until we got transferred to Charleston in '77, and then spent 2 years in Charleston at SEMA, and very busy down there, but we were just working on ships. We were not working on submarines at that time. And it just so happened that I was also working part-time in a little shipyard in Charleston. And the ships that we were working on at SEMA during the day, that's the ships we were working on at the little shop I was working at night. So you always knew who was going to sea, who was fixing to deploy, because that's what you was really working on, trying to get them ready to go to sea. And we spent 2 years in Charleston, very historic place. Got to do some sightseeing while we were in Charleston. It was a pretty place, but I always liked Norfolk more than I did Charleston, in fact anywhere. And then from Charleston, I found out I made chief, and then we got transferred to the Simon Lake, which at that time was at the weapons station in Charleston. That was in '79. And then we went to March of '79, we went to the Simon Lake at the weapons station, put on chief, did my chief stuff there, and we went from Charleston to Kings Bay in July of '79. So we opened up Kings Bay down in Georgia in July of '79, and then started refitting boats out of there. And then we spent almost 5 years in Kings Bay refitting submarines, and then that was my most enjoyable, even though it seemed like, you know, having come off of the Spear, I thought we were really busy on the Spear, but there we were just dealing with fast attacks, and their mission was to go out and hunt things down. Whereas when we went to the FBMs, Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarines, and when I was on the Spear, we went over to Scotland for 3 months, had TAD to Scotland. And that was the first time I was involved with a ship that just worked on FBMs. And over in Holy Lock, I mean, you're doing three things. You was either eating, sleeping, or on the beach having a drink before you had to come back, because it was it was steady all the time. You just in three sections every night, every third night you had the duty, and you're just going to work all night because you knew the boats over there, they were going to sea. So we did everything we could do, and that kind of gave me some insight. So when I got transferred to the Simon Lake, I had an idea of what we were going to be dealing with. And then sure enough, that's the way it was. We had a week of turnover when we got into Kings Bay, because when we got down there, the base, there was absolutely nothing there. It had been an Army ammunition base, and there was nothing there, absolutely nothing. And then some of the troops was living at the state park in tents. The Navy started renting housing in Jacksonville, Florida, and Brunswick, Georgia, and they were busing the troops from their house to the base. We work them during the day. They put them back on, get back on the bus, and then they'd go either to Brunswick or to Jacksonville, depending on where they lived. And very difficult, because you couldn't work them if they were riding the bus back and forth to work. Then they had to get on the bus and go home. We were living in St. Mary's. We had gone down there. We'd gone down there in December of '78, because we knew we were getting transferred. So we went down there Christmas Christmas holidays of '78, and we went down there to look for a place. Well, we drove down, and it just so happened that night that we were, the day that we went down was they played the Gator Bowl game in Jacksonville. There wasn't a hotel available between Brunswick, Georgia, and St. Augustine, Florida. Everything is booked up because people coming to the Gator Bowl. And that was the Woody Hayes in Ohio State. That was the night that he punched some player. That was, but we ended up sleeping in a truck. I know there was a little Jack's Market, kind of like a 7-Eleven, but it was called Jack's. And I asked a person, I said, we can't find anywhere to sleep. Can it hard if I just park the truck here and we're going to sleep in the cab of the truck? I said, yeah, that's all right. So we ended up staying in the truck. We looked around the next day. We found something. We filled out some paperwork to see about getting a house. And then we finally got, because that was before I even checked aboard the ship. And then after we got the ship down there, we were, the house, they got started with the house, and took about 4 or 5 months for them to get the house done. We ended up spending 3 months at the Stardust Lodge in Woodbine, Georgia, which was about 15 or 20 miles from St. Mary's. And it was $50 a night, $50 a week the board charged us to stay in that. We had one room. We told them we didn't need room service. And we had a little microwave, but we couldn't use the microwave because every time we plug it in and turn it on, it'd blow the circuit breaker. So we had to eat out. But you know, for $50, what can you say? And it was air conditioned. That's about all. And down there, golly, it was warm. It was warm. So, and when we first moved into the house, for the first 4 or 5 months, the roads weren't blacktopped. And if it rained, the cars would get stuck because it was the mud was so bad. And the city stationed a tractor at the end of the hard surface, so if you got stuck, they'd come in and pull you out.
Wow. And
when we first got down there, we were on a full-party phone line. We didn't have, you know, you just in Norfolk and Charleston, it was just a SOP. You had private lines, but down there, you was on a full-party line. But it took about 6 months, and then we got a private line. And then I was chief. I was running the machine shop then. Man, we didn't have cell phones or anything back then. I didn't even have a pager, but you know, we did have a phone. So it seemed like every time I got home, there was calling saying something was broke. We'd done something wrong. 38 shop had done something wrong. You know, we had to go back and do. You know, it was always something that was an emergency, and we had to go back, and so it was constantly going from the house back to the ship. But luckily, we lived right outside the back gate, so I could even ride my bicycle to the ship. And that was you know, coming in the back gate and going down the ship wasn't too far. But then years, you know, after we'd been there for a couple of years, they changed the arc, and then you had to go around to the front of the base, and that was a serious detour for me because I couldn't ride my bike then. I had to drive the car then. We went from Kings Bay, let's see, that was in 84. We came back to Norfolk, went to SEMA for a year because while I was in Kings Bay, we were blessed enough that I was able to do a bachelor's program through Southern Illinois at NAS at Jax. And we went down there every other weekend for 16 months, and we was able to complete a bachelor's program in occupational education, because I thought maybe my high school shop, Mr. Rhodes, wanted me to come back to home and take over his job as teaching machine shop. So that's where I went in and did that program, and then we managed to do that. We graduated from that in 82, and then took off a year, and then we did a master's program through Central Michigan for personnel management. And then those two programs, I found out I made E8 because I was chief E7. I found out I made E8, and then when we didn't put it on until we got to SEMA Norfolk in July of 84. And then when I got to Norfolk, I found out also that I had picked up warrant. So then we made warrant, and we had to wait for a year to put it on. So we didn't put warrant on until July of 85. So 1 year I was at SEMA Norfolk, and we were just at SEMA. At that time, that SEMA was just working on surface ships. So we were just doing all kinds of stuff. SEMA was basically the same thing as a tender. I mean, we had all kinds of shops. We did everything that a tender was doing, but it didn't get underway. So everybody was always busy, always busy. A lot of stuff going on there. But again, they weren't doing any submarine work.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that year, when I picked up warrant, I had to go down to Pensacola, went to 6 weeks of NDOT for warrant, and then went back up to New London, went to school for docking officer because I had gotten a set of orders for NDOT for docking officer on the Resolute, which was a floating dry dock. Well, it took us, when we left Kings Bay, we bought a 30-foot trailer, RV, and went down to Jacksonville looking at it because I knew we were coming back, and found us a nice little camper. And then I went back to the bank in St. Mary's and told at the bank guy, I told him, we need to get a loan to get this RV. He says, we're going. I told him we was going back to Norfolk, changing, and it was going to be something we might have to live in for a while. He says, "Do you really need it?" I said, "Yes, sir." So he said, "Okay, no paperwork or nothing." He just approved the loan, and because we'd been down there for 5 years, and we got to know the community. We helped with the high school, doing some stuff as far as their industrial arts, and we was on a board. We just tried to be a part of the community, even though we didn't have a lot of time. We did what we could do. So we came back up here and lived in that camper for a year. In 6 months, we finally got orders. Then we could buy a house, had another house built, and then I went on to NDOC up in New London, spent 6 weeks up there, came back and went to the Resolute, which was an AFDM-10, and it was a dry dock, and all we did was dock submarines. And then we spent 3 years there, docking all kinds of, we docked fast attacks. We didn't dock any boomers like we had worked on down in Kings Bay. So, because that base down there was building to be the Trident base for the East Coast. And the Trident boats were much bigger and than what we've been used to as far as the boomers. And then we spent 3 years on it, Resolute, good tour. We had our ups and downs because that's what the dry dock did. It went up, down. We drop a dock, put a boat in there, bring it back up, then they work on it, shipyard, tender, whoever had the tasking to work on a boat, that's who would do the work. All we had to do was get the thing up, blast it, get it painted, and then the shipyards would take care of everything else. And then after that, we got 3 years. That was in 88. We found out we had made W3, and then we went to the LY Spear for the second time. This time as a warrant officer, and then we ended up with R6, which was a pattern makers and a ship fitter. A foundry, and we did riggers, and we stayed busy doing the same thing we'd done, but with different crew. We had the divers, so we had a lot of stuff that we were doing there. We ended up on the Spear that time. The Spear made the second deployment it had ever made. We went to the Gulf in '91. Spent 5 months. We came back. It was my first real deployment on a ship. Like I said, we were gone 5 months. Got over, and the day we left Norfolk was the last time we saw a submarine to the day we came back to Norfolk. And then, because everything we worked on in the Gulf was ships, cruisers. In fact, Long Beach was a nuke cruiser, and she followed us around. She was a beautiful ship, but she's always needing something, because she was a nuke. And we're the only ship over in the Gulf that could tend to a nuke, because we had a nuclear facility aboard, and our people were trained to work on Navy reactors. So, but we know we did that 3 years on that, or I mean 4 years that time. So we ended up almost with 10 years on the Spirit 2 different times, total time. But then when we got back, spent another year waiting, and I got a set of orders to the Hunley in Norfolk. We ended up decomming the Hunley. It was very depressing. I mean, the ship was in the best shape it'd been in many, many years, and here we are fixing to turn the lights off. They decided it was time to decom it, and you know, like I said, it was just a kind of a depressing, especially the day of the ceremony, and everybody comes off the ship, and it's like they just turned the lights off. And then from there, I went to the Frank Cable down in Charleston. That's when I found out I was going to retire. Spent a little less than a year down on Frank Cable, and then we retired. In fact, I had my ceremony on the Spirit in Norfolk because the Cable was down in Charleston. We came back up here and did our ceremony July the 28th in '95, and did the ceremony, and then I retired. Actual date was 1 August '95. So it was interesting. I think we had some good times, had some rough times. Again, I say that the Simon Lake was the highlight. You know, even especially being a chief. You know, as a chief, you know, that's a word you really kind of look forward to. Is just about anybody that's in the Navy, they're striving to be a chief, unless they're coming in as an officer, then they start saying, warrant, hey, I need, you know, that's another word, that warrant. You know, it means that you've stepped on up and you're now the man. So, you know, same thing when you're the chief. You know, it comes back to the people. We had the people that worked with us and for us, and we worked for some great people. And you know, it all comes down to that matter. There's only a couple of times I had to hold on, because some of the people I had to work for, just one was really a pain. And you know, that's a good thing about being in the Navy. Just hold on, because sooner or later you'll either get transferred or they'll get transferred, and then you can start all over again. And I was lucky enough that after we retired, we ended up working at the base for another 15 years, kind of like a supervisor for the machine shop, and we were working on, because then all the tenders were gone. There were no tenders in Norfolk. Norfolk was the tender, both for submarines and for surface ships. And we were working all kinds of things for submarines and so the surface ships, and it's kind of like a assistant in a machine shop, just kind of helping them keep things going, and just kind of supervising. And we spent 15 years there. In 2015, that's when we pretty much fully retired. Our military now is so much different. I still have friends that are active duty. In fact, I just had a friend that just retired 3 months ago, and I've got another. He was a 04, and I've got another. He's 04. He's still active. Got another couple of years for him, and both of them worked for me at SEMA when I was a contractor. So, but the Navy's changing, and I just hope that we're prepared if and when something happens, because it makes you wonder if some of the things we've seen. But overall, it was a great time. We had, as I said, my wife and I were able to see some country, go some places we never had the opportunity to go to, and meet some great people, work with some and for some, and just a nice, enjoyable, most of the time, career.